And we should be live. Yeah, we should be live. Apologize for being late, ladies and gentlemen. We had a meeting that the city had in reference to expressing public comments in reference to police reform plan that they were submitting, as well as the proposed civilian review board. So definitely wanted to participate in that. And considering three of the five of us all live city, we were all participating in that tonight. So we apologize for being late. We are going to give it just a couple minutes to give people a chance to come on in. And those that are coming in, if you can take a minute to like, share, invite somebody to come in and join us, we'd appreciate it. Dax should be joining us. He's running a little late, but he should be with us. We are preventing Steve from eating his empanadas, thankfully. If I can't have empanadas, nobody's having empanadas. Oh, he gonna eat them anyway. Okay, I see how it is.
Nobody said I couldn't, but I won't. I won't. I won't. How you fellas doing? How you doing, Ezra?
I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good. Just a little hungry, that's all. I
I
worked
would
late and got some food delivered, so
I would have ate it.
I know you would have.
I would have. I mean, I drink my coffee.
I just didn't want any dough in my teeth or cheese.
Right. Pepper.
Again, you guys, we apologize for being late, but if you can go ahead and share, invite someone in, we would appreciate
however,
it.
have
We'll get started here in just a second. Danny, Ezra, how you think that went tonight?
It went
no?
as expected.
As expected.
There was nothing groundbreaking there. Except for we actually got to hear from the public defender, who sat on the committee the whole time and didn't really have a lot to say.
There was more engagement tonight than there was last night, so that was definitely good.
Yeah. No doubt about that.
All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Again, we apologize for being late tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, we had here in the city, we had a opportunity for public comment in reference to police reform and a civilian review board that's being proposed here in the city, and three of us that do a house call are, we all live in the same city here, live in Olean. So we definitely wanted to participate in that and make sure that our voices were heard and that we were being engaged. And yeah, no, I'm definitely playing. But we definitely I thank you guys for your patience, appreciate it. But we are going to jump in again as you guys are joining. We definitely appreciate it. Like, share, invite somebody in, engage with us in the comments. We think tonight it's an important topic. It's been a topic of importance for quite a while in various areas, but it's become a national hot topic as of late. Especially with issues surrounding COVID and levels of unemployment and people being in the difficult positions that they have been financially. So the topic has come up, as far as the right to counsel for renters, especially, where evictions are concerned. And, Maryland right now is considering passing legislation, or they may already have, in reference to guaranteeing counsel for renters, essentially like providing, essentially, for lack of better words, like a public defender, making sure that they have counsel made available to them. Because honestly, individuals don't have representation when they go into those situations, statistically are definitely behind the curve and generally lose the case when that's concerned. And honestly, housing, especially where families are concerned, it's hard not to view it as a basic human right. I mean, honestly, especially when a situation, is outside of the realm of an individual's control. And I think there's definitely different aspects to handle that. Um, but I apologize, you guys. I'm still, under the weather, so these guys are definitely going to take the helm tonight. I'm sure, my fat behind is not going to be able to stay quiet. It's just not going to happen. But
Never does.
I, I probably won't be as vocal as I normally am. But with that being said, we definitely want to address the topic, at least get more people aware of it, because I don't think many people are aware of how impactful it is in communities, in all honesty. So definitely want to do that again. As we're getting going, those of you that are on, go ahead and invite somebody in, share the video. Kelly, appreciate you joining us. Jesse, um, Steve, good evening. Good evening. Glad you could join us and participate in the comments there. We like that.
Hey, yeah, of course.
But yeah, well, I mean, what are your guys' thoughts, your initial thoughts?
Definitely
know-
think that it's much needed in a time like this. I'm sorry, I just didn't want to be the first one to take it. My aunt actually works for a law firm that handles cases like these. And she's also the head of pro bono in New York State. So in instances where people need help like that, it's called Law New York in our area. So there are avenues and places that people can take to get help that they need in times like this, where they're getting evicted in a pandemic and they have no representation.
I I'm with you, Gary. I think housing should be a basic human right, but at the same time, I understand not the eviction process, but why people are getting evicted right now. Nobody should be getting evicted right now in the middle of a pandemic. That's just straight up wrong. But I think there should be some sort of reimbursement for these landlords as well, right? Because somebody buys a house, they got mortgages to pay and taxes to pay and everything else, right? And if they're not getting their rental income, how can they pay these? So I'm a firm believer in that. This is one of these issues where, yes, nobody should be evicted at this point. Nothing, not in the middle of a pandemic, and but yet at the same time, you have to take care of the other side of that coin too, right? You have to be able to, these landlords are providing a service, and they should be reimbursed for the services which they provide. Maybe not from that particular person, maybe from a different source, maybe from some additional help from other places, you know, but definitely nobody should be evicted. But let's keep in mind the landlords that these guys still have mortgages on these properties too, and what's the value of them guys losing their property? If they lose that property, then they're that's less rental properties that somebody can live in, because that goes up for foreclosure. So uh,
So in this last stimulus that just passed, Danny, there is aid for landlords to get help from the federal government where they're in situations like this. I think that's another thing that needs to be pointed out, is people really aren't aware of the help they can get. I think the last couple of stimuluses that passed, they weren't for like smaller landlords that own like one or two houses. That it was more for like commercial places like in New York City, where they have all those apartments and they weren't collecting rent on any of them, and the federal government helped them out. But there's not always an avenue for the smaller people.
Now, do you know
But in this one there is. So
if they're protected with the mortgage and taxes, or just the mortgage?
the homeowners aren't protected at all.
No, I'm talking about the landlord.
The landlord's not protected on their mortgage at this point. They still have to pay if that's a rental property. They
Oh
have
no, that's what Ezra's saying, is the stimulus it's protecting renters as well as the landlords, but I don't know if it's protecting the tax portion of Because it's a huge percentage of
I
what you have to
believe-
pay
I
on a
believe
mortgage
they're
is
getting-
taxes.
I believe they're actually getting like straight money for whatever, like they're being reimbursed for like whatever that tenant's behind.
Ty says no, we're not. So I don't, I know there was a period where, initially there was like X amount of months that a lot of, not all, but a lot of finance companies were essentially kind of putting the mortgage on hold. They weren't really deferring it. They were kind of putting it on hold. And at the end of X
Oh,
amount of
yeah.
months, they were saying, hey, pay it all at this point. But I don't know, there really wasn't anything. And so it is difficult because you're like, you don't want to say, hey, evict these people, but there's also the flip side that I think needs to be recognized, is that there's some people, and I hate to say this, but people are people. There's some people that haven't missed a beat with their income, but are taking advantage of the situation and not paying bills and going, oh, COVID. And so they're in a situation where they could pay their bills and they're choosing not to pay their bills. And, for whatever reason. And so you have that situation. Now, I essentially haven't missed a beat with, for the most part, my income's been pretty solid during this COVID situation. There's been a handful of times, there's been some things that have happened. But if I wasn't paying my landlord, and just doing whatever with my money, or even just letting my money stack, that's not fair to my landlord. So at some point, my landlord has to go through their process as well. So, I understand that. So I understand landlords feeling as if they need to go through the process in order to quote unquote evict or to recoup their funds, that type of thing. Like I understand it. I don't like it, especially during this time. I would like to say, hey, no, but I think a lot of landlords, especially in smaller communities, they know their tenants. And so they're able to work with their tenants. They're able to, hey, what are you able to do? Let's work something out. Let's, figure it out. So there's that crosstalk. And in smaller communities, that tends to be kind of beneficial. But when it gets to a point, when it gets to a point to where they have to seek the legal ramifications, when they go to court, most people that are in a true situation where there's no income coming in or very minimal income coming in, they can't afford representation. And so now they go to court, and the landlord is there with their attorney and the renter is there by themselves, and they don't know how to go through the process. And most of the time they end up losing. Whether they could have won or not, they end up losing. And so should they at the very least be afforded counsel? Should they have the right to counsel going into those situations if COVID was truly the reason to put them in the situation?
So I have a question for you. Is being evicted a crime? Like, as the
Nope.
person being evicted, are you being charged with any kind of crime?
No.
Are you any chance of going to jail? Any record, anything?
You can go to court and they could put a civil lawsuit on you,
Right.
I
So
believe
that's
but no
That's-
jail.
this is the next step then. What I suppose laws have to be rewritten if we're going to assign lawyers or defenders to non-criminal cases, because that just isn't the case currently for anything. And so it's a slippery slope.
Right.
Are we going to then say anytime someone's sued civilly, they have the right to a defense attorney? And I just don't think that's the case. And so this particular thing, I know some people feel housing is a right, and I guess should be publicly provided if not available by your choice privately. But
Yeah.
I just don't think any of that actually myself. But because of the slippery slope and because it's not a crime, there's no crime involved except for the landlord would think it's theft of time in their space. But I don't think a public defender should be assigned.
And I believe that everybody has a right to representation. So if somebody has, whether or not they have a lawyer or don't have I think if somebody's being accused of something, they should be afforded a lawyer. At what expense that expense count that comes out of, that's a debate back and forth. But I don't think that I one of the issues that I have with this whole COVID thing, and this being just one piece of that, is much like Gary said, people have a tendency to use COVID as a way of some people not doing the right thing and what they're supposed to be doing. I think that if you're going to use the eviction due to COVID, that you should have to show that you've changed, that your income changed due to COVID, right? I shouldn't be afforded the same ability to not pay my bills as somebody who lost their job to COVID, right? So that's how I feel about it. Like, I think if you can show that eviction should be wiped clear off the table. That's my personal view on that. But I think that if your financial status hasn't changed due to COVID, then what's changed for you?
Expensive.
Right?
So we have, this is clearly not Ty Malone.
This is my Aunt Jessica, that actually works for Law New York in Olean here. And so she can go ahead and speak to what we're talking to right now.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. I'm happy to provide some information for everyone. Regarding the Right to Counsel project for tenants in housing court, there's this thing, it's called Access to Justice, and where people who are facing civil court are facing possible eviction, which could put them on the street. They're facing loss of income. And the studies have proven that having a lawyer improves the outcomes for people. People are unfairly treated if they don't have a lawyer. They aren't aware of their rights, they aren't treated fairly, and they're taken advantage of. So it's very important for us as a society to protect people's rights to housing and make sure that they aren't taken advantage of.
So just having that individual with them essentially changes the entire perception of that particular individual when they walk in the courtroom.
Not only that, in civil proceedings, since you aren't faced with jail, you have to exercise your rights. If you don't display defenses for the judge, if you don't, basically state your case in a way that the court accepts it and will listen to that, where's the scales of justice fall?
Mm-hmm.
They fall with the person who can afford an attorney to present the court with an argument that's eloquent, follows the law, and applies the law, and therefore gives them the advantage.
So even if my case, and even if what I'm saying is valid, because I don't translate it in the language of the court, I essentially am behind the power curve because I speak a different language, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
And the way the civil courts work sometimes, if you don't present yourself or your case in a manner, let's say you have evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a very common thing, rent receipts. Or let's say you have a neighbor who has witnessed bad behavior by your landlord, where let's say he locked you out of your house or denied you access to like your water hookup or something. Or you didn't pay your rent. So he goes down and shuts off the supply chain, which is in the basement that you can't get to.
Okay.
These are all criminal acts, but unfortunately, it's up to the police to enforce criminal acts. So when you have a tenant who calls the police and says the landlord shut my water off, what do you think happens? Do you think that the law just jumps right in and says, oh, you person who didn't pay their bill, who didn't pay the landlord, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go take care of that landlord who broke the law? No, they don't.
Right.
This is why you need civil attorneys to help people exercise their rights to basic things: water, food, housing, safety.
Okay.
I agree with you 100% that somebody should be able to be represented in a court of law. If you're going into a court of law, you should have representation because presentation is everything in a court of law. Like I've said before, my whole thing is I don't think that anybody should be evicted at this moment in time out of their home because we are in the middle of a pandemic. If you're affected by the pandemic, right? So
I mean, who in America can say at this point in time they aren't somehow affected by the pandemic? They may not have lost their job. No, let me explain. They may not have lost their job, but just like everybody else, they've seen the price of food go up. They've seen their electricity bill go up because they've had to have their children at home on a device constantly. There's no time away from their house. Their heat bills are up. Their electric bills are up. Their food bills are up. As much as we say, you know, kids can go get their meals from school, what's to account for the adults who may have had meals supplied at their office or who, you know, simply worked out a meal plan with other coworkers? You know, I bring in this one day, you bring in this another day. People are being affected whether or not they lost their job.
Well, just an increase in utilities alone. Like,
Right.
you know,
But-
I'm just myself in the apartment working from home. The fact that I'm here every day using my utilities much more than I would on a normal average every day, you know, my utilities have gone up, you know, much more. So, you know, I definitely get being affected, you know, in that route, you know, definitely.
I get being affected. I do. I'm affected just as much as everybody else. When I go to the store, I pay the same amount for food as everybody else. I
Mhm.
work from home a lot. My utilities go up like everybody else's. And so everybody, you're right, everybody has been affected by the pandemic. But I think that when you look at it, like landlords need, what do we do for the landlords? Are they just supposed to lose their house? Is that okay?
No, that's not. And, you know, there are protections out there. I do believe that if you live in New York State, I think you have a lot better protections than if you live in some other states. You know, I see it from both sides. I advocate for the rights of tenants. I advocate for the law being applied equally and fairly across the board. But at the same time, we understand what landlords are going through. Landlords is where tenants get their housing from. If the landlords don't have the housing available to tenants, you know, we're still in the same situation. We still have people out on the street. I do believe there needs to be a bigger effort to help landlords who can't directly access the help that's been made immediately available. If you have a mortgage on your house, you're fine. Mortgages always make sure they take care of their mortgages, so taxes are being taken care of that way. If you're a landlord who owns your home without a mortgage and your tenant isn't paying rent, you're in a different situation. You're more than likely behind on your homeowner's insurance. You may be behind on repairs. You may be behind on, you know, your tax payments. More needs to be done to identify those landlords and try to give them relief the same way tenants are given relief.
So my
But at
question's
the same time, no one should lose their house because their tenant can't pay their rent. But at the same time, tenants shouldn't be kicked out right now because they can't pay their rent.
Because
So-
I have a personal situation that this is why this issue is personal to me. Like it's necessarily not my personal situation, but I know some people who have had some situations. And one of the situations is in the city of Olean, there was a house that should have been condemned that somebody was living in, wouldn't pay rent. The landlord went to every person in the city to say, this heater's not even working and I can't get in there to fix it. And this person's got 8 space heaters in the house. Code enforcement went there, realized that the heat wasn't working, turned around and gave the landlord a $1,500 fine. But he couldn't get in the house to fix the heater because the tenant had to leave and she wasn't even paying rent. And and then sold the house and then it was condemned. What do you do with that?
Well, there's a lot of different avenues you can take before it gets to that point. The law does protect landlords who are having their home destroyed. If your home, you know, if your home is being destroyed, there's ways to prevent that. If you take a look at the law, if anybody who owns a home and they're renting it out, if they take a look at the New York State law, it's very, very clear. They've made it very clear for landlords on the certain types of cases that are allowed in court for emergency proceedings. If people follow the law, I imagine the law will be applied. If you try to circumvent the law, like a lot of landlords do, and try to use other tactics to get what you want instead of following the law and the procedures that are already laid out, sometimes you're not going to end up with the right solution. But when the law isn't being applied correctly, that's when you should get an attorney. And I would tell the same thing to any tenant. If any tenant has a problem where their landlord isn't following the law, or they feel that their housing rights are being violated, they should contact Law New York. We're located at the corner of South Berry and East State Street, just kitty corner from the police station.
Well, I just got one more thing to say about that, and then I'll let Steve, because he's been trying to get in here.
Thank you.
The code enforcement told this landlord to sell their house, so he sold the house, and you just lost a minority homeowner who will never buy another house in Olean due to them circumstances. So that's not productive and positive.
Something productive and positive, I think, would be holding the city and the code enforcement officials more accountable for the standards that they allow landlords to rent people in.
Yep.
It depends on who you are. When you go to buy a house in Olean, supposedly there's supposed to be a inspection done. Certain people have been able to circumvent those inspections. Why is that? I think we need to ask the people who are in charge of those inspections why that is. It's one of those situations where, again, nothing is being applied equally and fairly. All of these problems have solutions and have avenues for people to, address them. But when people hear that, Joe got to handle it this way, but, Sally, she didn't have the same luck when she tried to handle it that way. And then they think there is no solution. So people need to hold the mayor, the council, code enforcement, every city department who has a hand in all of these things. We spend money on permits. We spend money on landlord registrations. Where does that money go? What is that money being used for? Is it being used to pay for these code enforcement inspections that are being done? I think we all know, Olean is a small place. Everyone knows that there are certain landlords that repeatedly have tenants in their buildings that are living in substandard conditions.
Yep.
Code enforcement knows it. Everybody knows it. But why isn't anything being done about it? And a lot of these landlords who are the biggest problems, the amount of money they have coming in from their units, there is no excuse as to why they aren't taking care of these properties.
That's right.
That last section you just talked about, I completely agree with. I wanted to ask, let's set aside this COVID situation for now. If our argument is that people who are being evicted deserve the right to counsel in civil court, are you saying that even apart from the pandemic, your organization and you want that to continue moving forward?
Yes. It's
Okay,
not just my organization. There's actually, if you could check out the ABA website, the American Bar Association, as well as the New York State Bar Association website. There's a President's Commission on Access to Justice. There's people all over the country that have been looking at this issue for quite some time, which is how the pilot Right to Counsel project started. They have started in, I know there's a Right to Counsel project in Monroe County, where anyone facing eviction has the right to counsel. Now, it may shock everyone, but a lot of these programs too are also setting themselves up to allow for representation and rights to counsel for the landlords. So not only will tenants have right to counsel, but small landlords will also have the right to counsel as well, because that way it benefits everyone.
So
If the landlord knows the law and can have someone help him navigate the law to get the result he's looking for by following the law, it's a better outcome for everyone. Our attorneys in our project aren't about, trying to get, a lot of people have this misconception that legal aid lawyers try to help tenants avoid paying rent. That is so far from the case. We just try to make sure that tenants' rights are preserved, that they aren't being taken advantage of by landlords, and that the courts are enforcing their rights and are enforcing the law correctly, equally, and fairly.
I
We're
totally
not
get it.
trying to help anyone, skirt out of having to pay their fair share. That's a common misconception. That's not the case.
So my question then is for everybody, the same as I had before. If we think that people have a right to counsel in an eviction circumstance, and even the landlord has a right to counsel in that circumstance, then it goes to follow that for equality's sake, then all civil cases need to have the right to counsel. And so I don't know how you apply that to everything. Because for equality's sake, and if you have a right to counsel in an eviction case, then ergo vis-a-vis, you have the right to counsel in every case you are presented to in court. And I don't know if that's possible. So has anyone talked about that in your organization?
No. Apparently, funding for civil legal services isn't something that's huge and expansive. So we try to target areas that affect people the most, especially vulnerable populations, people with disabilities, people that don't have a large expendable income, people who are just living paycheck to paycheck, which unfortunately these days is a lot of people. A lot of people think if you have a job and you work full time that you shouldn't have any problem and you shouldn't need any help. And that's just not the case. So, having a lawyer to help people navigate the legal system in any type of matter when they could essentially be losing what we call their essentials of life, housing, food, healthcare. Those are the issues that we think are most important, that people should have a lawyer for, should have the right to counsel for. The same way the court has made a movement over the years. We think of family court, that's civil cases too. When people are in family court and they're facing, removal of their child or a custody battle, if you don't have the funds to afford an attorney, the court will assign one. Why? Because they feel parental rights, your access to your child, is important, and it is a right that should be protected. And this is the same kind of idea behind the right to counsel in civil cases. There's certain rights that are just so important and so vital to people's, way of life, that are just essential, that they deserve and can extremely benefit from having a lawyer with them. And a lot of times, in situations that are no fault of their own, they just need representation.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, similar. I would think, to kind of, make a correlation or analogy similar to a triage on a battlefield. I have to make a determination who gets treated first and essentially who doesn't get treated at all, because I can't do anything for them, and what's life threatening, what do I have to do, and who can wait until at the end of the battle type of thing.
Yeah, that's not how rights work though.
Well, essentially, I mean, it does,
But that's not how it's supposed to work. Rights are for everyone.
The courts are deciding, she's saying, your parental rights when it comes to your kids in family court, that's civil court. That's already deemed that you have right to counsel, so the courts have already decided that that particular right is more important than other rights that you enjoy. And oftentimes what we talk about being a right oftentimes is a privilege. Like we throw the word rights around, and what we talk about oftentimes as rights in this country really are privileges. A lot of times, in my opinion, I think a lot of them are privileges. And you have people that talk about, oh, well, that's what this country is built on, and it's my right, and it's my right to do this. And as somebody that served and has seen combat, I have a completely different view of rights and privileges than most people do. I have a different understanding of that with what I've seen in other countries from the perspective of a soldier, not as a tourist. And so for me, it's not difficult for me to understand the prioritizing of rights, so to speak. In a perfect world, would I like to see the availability for counsel in reference to any civil case? The way that, as complicated as our legal system is, I would love the availability of counsel in every legal case. But I think right now it has to be prioritized because the funding is just not there for every aspect and every legal case. Until it is available, we have to prioritize it, in my opinion.
I have a question for you. You said that this was a pilot project, right?
Mhm.
Where does the funding come from this pilot project? Is it from the state?
I would have to look. I think a lot of it comes from the Commission on Access to Justice. Um, I really don't want to give the wrong information. I do believe some of it is funded by the courts, by the New York State Office of Court Administration. But you can find out more information about it by checking out the OCA website, I believe in, I think it's the 7th Judicial District, but the Monroe County courts, the Rochester City courts, is one of the areas that they've done this. Now, in New York City courts, they've had right to counsel in housing cases for years. So this is not something new for the state. It's just something that they're expanding to residents of upstate New York.
I was just wondering who's actually funding the project, because I always like to know. I always like to follow the money. The money will always lead you to the right answer. So,
and that's something that's it's very interesting that you bring that up, because that's one of the things that these groups, these access to justice groups, and the court administration, modernization of courts groups have looked at, is the outcomes and how much they cost taxpayers. If you have someone who's coming into court 3-4 times on a landlord-tenant matter, every time they appear in court, that's costing the taxpayer some money. If getting a lawyer involved could have that court case settled and out of court in one appearance, you're saving the taxpayers money, court operation costs. There's lots of figures and lots of data to support these types of initiatives. So I would strongly suggest, if people want to know more, if they have questions, like I said, you can check it out on the court's website. And a lot of it has been proven and shown that when in a lot of these projects, that when you invite representation earlier, it can help expedite a case, and not expedite it in a bad way, but rather expedite it into a settlement that is positive for all parties involved. Because even if you're in the case of a landlord trying to evict someone, if you're in court for 2 months on adjournments, as a landlord, you're not getting rent during those 2 months.
Right.
So in those instances too, when you're the one asking the court to give you some type of relief, having the other side represented by an attorney who can work with you on a settlement and help you get through that process is beneficial to all parties involved. So the cost saving matters are definitely there, and the data behind to support all of that is definitely there.
I know some of the states, like specifically Maryland right now, they're looking at like putting it to like a statewide vote, essentially, and it being funded on a state level, from what I understand. I know the majority of voters, from the articles that I've read, are in support of it for that very reason. It actually has the way they're looking at it is the fact that it has the potential to cut taxpayer expenses by moving cases through the system more quickly, as well as being beneficial to both parties. It's not being viewed as a like a get out of jail free card, for a lack of better words, for tenants, but beneficial for both landlords and tenants. When the tenant's in the right, it's beneficial for the tenant. When the landlord's in the right, it's beneficial for the landlord because it expedites the process. So that's how it's being viewed. It's being viewed from a very logical perspective from the voter base, at least from in Maryland, which was surprising to me when I was reading that. But it was definitely encouraging.
Yeah, I would love to see the numbers from New York and from the New York perspectives, especially from a taxpayer's perspective, because I think that's important. But I was glad to hear you say that the lawyers, I mean, the landlords themselves would also at some point be provided maybe some representation too, because I mean, if we're I'm a big equal rights person, so if we're going to do equal rights, then you got to do it across the board. So I was glad to see that piece itself was going to possibly be implemented. That's a good thing. But I would love to see
only if you're a small landlord. I mean, there will be limitations. I mean, they don't, if it was, like a huge corporation, development corporation, they're not, going to be entitled to, cancel.
They gonna get the break.
No, I only worry about the little guy.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand. I want the people who aren't making the money to get the help, but rights mean all people are inalienably.
But those aren't inalienable rights. I mean, you even look at the COVID relief bill that just got signed. There's a cutoff based on income levels.
Right, but we're calling this a right to counsel.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using the word right. That's all I'm saying. So
I still stand behind what I said. Like I think that in order for you not to pay your rent, you should have to show that you were affected negatively by COVID. But that's just my stance on it. I think that some people use that as a get out of jail free card.
The lawyer just told you everybody's been impacted by COVID.
So I don't have to pay mortgage?
Everybody.
Let a landlord speak to this.
Okay, we got the real time alone now.
The real time alone.
And so far, every stimulus that's came out for a landlord has been, there's criteria set around it. The first one that came out, the landlord had to have 50 properties or more, 50 units or more in order to get any of the money. Did he really need that money?
wow.
I don't think so. So like when you got a guy like me who owns, 4 or 5 properties, that's the only income that I have, what am I supposed to do when my tenants don't pay? I don't have mortgages. The second one that comes out, you have to have a mortgage in order to get it, because the mortgage companies are going to make, the banks are going to make sure they get their money. Now, if you don't have no mortgages, like my wife was saying, like me, you're stuck. If your tenants don't pay, they just don't pay. So right now, the stimulus that's coming out, they say that you'll be able to get up to like $5,400. If the tenant is behind, they'll pay part of that rent. Luckily for me, my tenants, one of my tenants is behind, but she ain't behind that much. And so that's good. But there's people out there that are in my situation that their tenants didn't pay anything. At any point, my tenant could have said, hey man, I ain't paying. You can't kick me out. Ain't nothing you can do about it. But they didn't do that. And when you can have a relationship with that tenant, that's when things can work out for both parties.
Right.
You heard what she was saying, and I'm a landlord. So like I'm with her. I agree on that. I'm for fair housing. You know what I mean? I've been broke. I've been poor before. I'm still poor. I own properties. I'm still poor. But if you can't, Josh Anderson and all them other people out here that own hundreds of properties and stuff, no, they shouldn't get no money. They don't need none. How you buying new vehicles during COVID? Your tenants ain't. You trying to put them out? No, I can't. I'm not for that.
But
The person that you were speaking of, would that had the problem with the house, they could have went to a lawyer. I told them, go to a lawyer because there is things you could do. That person was messing their house up. The mayor could have been in trouble for that. The code enforcement could have been in trouble for that, and they
There's
should
a
be.
change coming.
There should be.
Ty, I agree with you, and I'm happy that you have good tenants. But I look at it from the perspective of somebody that's like you that owns 4 or 5 properties, and everybody decided not to pay.
Mhm.
And there's nothing that landlord could do, and there's no bailout bill for that landlord. And then what is he supposed to do?
He's got to
What-
call his senators just like me
Yeah.
every day. Call his senators, and
But-
not just where he lives, but the whole senators in in all New York State, and tell them that's what we need.
So I'm happy to hear that there's some bailout money in the bill for smaller landlords like you guys. Some, not
Some.
nearly as much as you guys,
Exactly.
but there's some there for you.
Mhm.
But for
And
the
it's
past,
it's unfortunate because you have to wonder. You really do. You have to stop and wonder. How involved, how much of an interest did local municipalities take, and how vocal did they truly get to try to even try, even if they got shut down? But how often did they make the phone call? Did they send the email? Like, I'm the kind of person, I'm gonna send the email so I got a paper trail, especially with something like this, because I want to show my community, listen, I was making noise for you. I was trying to find a way to get some kind of help for my community in my area. I'm holding my code enforcement accountable. I'm holding the police department accountable to do the things that they need to do. Like, it's not just oh, well, yeah, I had a conversation with them. Man, I can tell you I had a conversation with somebody all day. I can tell you I picked up the phone and had, oh, I called the senator and this is what happened, or whatever. I can tell you that all day. But I really wonder how involved local municipalities got during this whole process to truly got exactly, D. If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. I learned a long time ago when I got involved in collections and even in the military, we used to carry around this little green book, right? We called it our leadership book. We used to carry around this green book, and it was the only thing that I was allowed to put in my camo pocket, in my BDU pocket on my leg, was my green leadership book. And everything got written down in that book, man. If I had a conversation with you, it went in that book. Good, bad, or indifferent. If I had some what we call hip fire training, it went in that book. Everything I did got written down because I was able to reference it and go back to it. And oftentimes I had you initial it if it was a conversation with you that I had or a training session or something like that, because you weren't going to come back to me and tell me it didn't happen, And so I really wonder, like even last night when we were at the public comments, the mayor took an opportunity. He was like, oh yeah, we're getting a piece of this COVID money, but it's got restrictions around it and we're not sure what the restrictions are and we're still trying to figure it out. And a whole lot of stuttering and ums and ands, and when specific questions get asked, the response is, oh well, it's really complicated, it's a complicated formula. That's the go-to answer when I don't want to give you the answer. And when those types of things start happening, I start wondering what was real, and not just here in Olean, but really the smaller municipalities. How active were they for their communities to try to get help for those smaller landlords, that have the 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, or were the only ones they were thinking about were the larger land developers, the ones that they feel can financially impact their agenda. Because honestly, that tends to be the political tradition, and unfortunately, we've got to get, I hate to say that we got to get back to doing what's right for the people, because we should have never left it in the first place. But that's where we're at. We got to do right by the people. And if that representation, like Danny, you had mentioned, and it was Jesse, right? It was just
Right.
on,
Yeah.
right? Okay. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry.
Jessica.
Jessica, I'm sorry. All right, well, hey, that's why I asked. You know, she said that representation being made available for those landlords that weren't in a position to afford counsel either. You know, that's an awesome thing because it shows that they're trying to do what's right. You know, you're not just trying to skate around something. You're trying to do what's in the best interest of the people, you know, and I think that's huge. That's important in every aspect of this thing, not just in, you know, the right to counsel for eviction. Do I think it's important? I do think it's important because, like Jessica was saying, if you can't translate it into the language of the court, even if you're right, it doesn't matter. And that's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate, but it's a reality. You know?
And I think it's important that everybody gets representation, even the little guy, like you said, Gary, and I was glad to hear that.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you brought some light to that because, you know, when we talk about rights and we talk about equal rights, we can't talk about them one-sided. We got to talk about them on both sides, and we got to protect both rights, the rights of the small landlord and the rights of the people living in the house. They have rights equally.
That's good. I'm
And
glad we came around to that, and I'm glad she mentioned it earlier that they're working on getting the right to counsel for the landlords as well, because I mean, property and leases and all these things are legal contracts, binding, and if landlords don't, if Ty has 5 properties and no one's paying rent, he can't afford a lawyer.
Right.
And so he also needs the coverage, just like a tenant who doesn't have a job needs coverage. So
right.
Just know that
I'm glad we're making
if
it.
I can't pay, if Ty's tenant isn't paying his mortgage and we're in the middle of a pandemic, Jessica is not letting Ty kick them out of the house. Just so you guys know, just so we're straight
Well,
up.
you
clear.
know, the other
Like
thing
people
is,
have an
That's a
equal
whole
right.
nother. That's a whole nother.
People just need to have good hearts, like Aunt Jessie over there, because she's not worried about like, hey, can this person afford this? Hey, we're in a pandemic, you can't get kicked out of your house. It doesn't matter.
So there's another aspect to this that I want to point out though that I think people fail to do. Most people don't take the time, whether it's with a smaller landlord or whether it's with a developer or like a housing complex, they don't take the time to read their lease. They just initial and sign, initial and sign, initial and sign. And then they get themselves in a situation where they signed away things that they never should have. Like they agreed to things that really they never should have.
Let me address something to that.
Okay.
So in New York State,
Mhm.
okay, and this is for every tenant to write this down.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Y'all heard that, right? For those in the back, one more time for those in the back, write this down.
Write it down. It doesn't matter what a landlord puts in the lease. If it's not New York State law, it don't work.
Okay.
I could put in there that every month you got to give me an extra $25 and you sign that lease. You're going to think that you got to give me an extra $25 because you signed that lease, but New York State law says no. So it doesn't matter what a lease says. It all matters what New York State tenant rights say.
But if they don't know that, if they don't know that, if they don't go through that lease to see it, to understand it, to know what they're even, you know, agreeing to.
Now don't do that. Don't not read because I said that. Don't not read. Read it, you know, because they could slide some stuff in there that you will have to pay for, you know, and so you want to make sure. Knowing your rights is half the battle. If you don't know your right, I've been in court before and I had to help a tenant out because they didn't know what they were trying to. I knew what they were trying to say, but they wasn't saying it right. In order, like my wife said, in order to court to get it, it has to be said properly, written properly. So, you know, I've helped tenants out like that in court against me. So like, you know, you like my nephew said, you gotta have, it's really about good hearts. You know, if somebody has a good heart, you can see like these situations. I've been in some of these people's situations before. I understand. Just because I'm on the other side of the fence, that don't mean I'm going to switch up and I forgot about it.
That's one of the things, like, you know, being in collections, and, you know, I've been in the collection industry the better part of 15 years. And one of the things that I tell people is that I haven't forgotten what it's like to be on the other side of the phone. like I've been on the other side of the phone because of things that were outside of my control. I've been on the other side of the phone because of my own stupidity, and I haven't forgotten that. I talk to individuals, I talk to them with that in mind. Like, listen, I understand you didn't go to Walmart and buy yourself a shovel to dig yourself the hole you're in. I get that. And maybe you did. But at the end of the day, I got the ladder. Let me give it to you. We'll crawl out together. You got to give me the opportunity. Oh, man, I talked to a lot of people. Yeah, you have. But you never talked to Gary Harvey before. So give me an opportunity because we're going to make this thing happen, because I understand what it's like to be in that hole. I've been there. And I do my best not to forget it. And I'm sorry, I just read through the chat and it threw me off. These guys is clowning over here.
I think it's that's a double-edged sword, whether you've been there or not, and how you
be.
Because I can tell you, like, I bet everybody knows I didn't grow up in the best situation. I don't hide that. I don't try to run from that. But at the same time, I still believe that everybody has a responsibility.
Yeah, you got to balance it, definitely.
And even if you're doing wrong, I'm going to try to help you do wrong. I'm going to try to help you not do wrong anymore. But at the same time, I'm going to remind you that you didn't hold up your end of the bargain with your responsibility. And you should know better. But we're going to fix it. But understand, you didn't do what you were supposed to do.
Yo, I'm gonna be like Mr. Clark and lean on me, and you gonna be Sam's. I'm gonna take you up to the top of the school.
So,
I'm gonna be like, you smoke crack, don't you, boy? Well, go ahead and jump.
yeah.
I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire, but I'm gonna help you change. I'm not just gonna tell you to change. I'm gonna help you.
But a
If
lot
you
of
tell your
times,
tenant to jump off their roof, you're going to lose every court case you're in.
yeah, that tenant's gonna own that house. but
That's
you
right.
know, but a lot of times when you hold people accountable on this, and I'm gonna get off into another subject, and I don't really want to. A lot of times when you hold people accountable and you tell them that they did wrong, people tell you forgot where you came from.
Sometimes.
And you got to remind them, no, I didn't forget where I came from, but there's a right wrong here.
Mhm.
And it is what it is.
What if the wrong though, Danny, was like before the house was even purchased?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Like the whole process of like having it inspected before you're supposed to buy it and stuff. Like, what if the wrong was already there? Like, why would you buy the house knowing somebody was in there?
That falls to the city for not taking care of what they need to take care of.
And if you don't know about buying a house, then you should really be getting a hold of somebody who knows about buying a house before you purchase a house.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're buying a house to rent it out as an investment property, you better at least know your ABCs of inspecting a house by yourself.
Yeah. Like, and I love the program that Jesse's working with. It sounds good. I would love to see the financials on that though. Is it really saving the taxpayers money? Because I think in every conversation you have to ask that question.
So I can speak about that a little bit. I mean, obviously she knows more about it than I do, but just take into the fact that if I got to go to court, say I do have another job, I own a couple properties and I have a job. Now I got to go to court. When I go to court, there's never going to be a time that I can go to court and it's done in one day. It just doesn't happen. So now I got to take how many days off of work? Now that we got to pay the court people to be there and everything, all these times that we have to go. When a lawyer, if my lawyer or myself can talk to another lawyer with the tenant and the tenant knows like this is what has to happen, they know that I can't be cheating them because there's a lawyer involved. You know what I mean? That process can skip. You can skip like days in that process. So instead of me going to court 8 times, I might only go to court twice. That in itself just saves money.
Or not at all.
Yeah,
the lawyers might work it out.
Correct.
That's what I was going to say, or not at all. You can plead that out. But I think, if that's the case, then yeah, you're saving money. And I'm definitely going to read about the Maryland one and how they're saying that that's going to save the taxpayers money, because I think that's interesting. And I think some people if you present this to them, they don't, if it's presented in a positive way like that, you're going to get all kinds of, yeah, because once Gary said, oh my God, they're saving these people in Maryland money, I'm like, yeah, well, let's look at that. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's look at that. That in the way it's being presented is positive. And I think there's an opportunity there if that's the case. There's an opportunity to move that forward. As long as both sides
I mean,
get
with
your
like
Linda Bartlett's and your Jeff Midoff and them guys like that, they're not going to like it because they have tons of properties where they buy at an auction that is this close from being condemned. And instead of fixing the property up, they just move somebody in there. And now that tenant is going to have somebody that can back them up when the person's trying to throw them out because they didn't pay the rent because the water's leaking up in the sink every time they flush the toilet. When you have that problem, now they have some backing behind
yeah,
them.
you'll have more numbers as far as like more data looking at New York City because they've been doing it for
Correct.
a longer period of
Yeah.
time than you will looking at Monroe. And Maryland hasn't actually done it. They're just running basic numbers off of, hey, if we cut down X amount of court cases, like, you know, Ty's saying X amount of days in court, it would save X amount of dollars. But like New York City has actually done it. You'll get more solid data from there, you know, and more relatable data as far as New York State's concerned. But guys, we've gone roughly an hour. So I definitely want to, I know she's not on, but thank Jessica and Ty for hopping on. Steve, I hope your empanadas are ice cold.
I hope his kids ate them.
Seems how I
I would have smacked him in the head.
I did not get to enjoy them. But I, you know, appreciate you guys that tuned in and those that you were engaged in the comments. Definitely appreciate it. Go ahead if you haven't already. Check out the Facebook page. Follow the Facebook page. If you've been, you know, if you enjoyed the content, any of the content at all that we put up, go ahead and write a quick little review or recommendation for the page, as well as subscribe to our YouTube page under the same name, Reflections of Dr. Gary Harvey. We try to get the every show up either the same night or, you know, within a day. But go ahead and check that out as well. Excuse me. Appreciate that, D. Thanks. But next week we are tentatively going to focus on Women's History Month. We're going to try to have a couple people on with us next week, focus on some aspects of that. Also coming up in the next couple weeks, we are going to kind of go back over the last 4 to 6 months, hit some of the topics that we've previously talked about and how they relate to the stigma and stereotype that centers around mental health. There is a lot of aspects, especially during the pandemic, around that centers around mental health, the stereotype, the stigma that surrounds it, and even with how individuals' mental health has been impacted during the pandemic, we still as a society are having a hard time grasping the importance of our mental health and the reality behind you know, essentially self-care and addressing mental health, and that it's not something taboo. It's not something that, you know, we should be clowning and making fun of or ignoring. That it should be something that we should be confident about taking care of and seeking help, and we shouldn't be ashamed and, you know, embarrassed to talk about it or deal with it. You know, it's unfortunate, especially as men. Oftentimes as men, it's very taboo for us to talk about, you know, dealing with certain things or going to seek therapy, especially as Christian men. You know, it's like you talk about going to see a therapist, and now all of a sudden it's like, you know, you're going to hell because you're talking to a therapist or you got a demon or something. It's, you know, not everything's a demon. Sometimes you just need to go get some counseling and you know, that type of thing. But so we are going to, in the next couple of weeks, we are going to kind of talk about the mental health stigma and how several of these topics that we've talked about over the course of the last 6 months. Steve and I were talking earlier, we've been doing house call for right about 8 months now. Started it back in July, and the podcast has been going since June of 2020. So we've been going about 15 months with that. So definitely been interesting. So, but appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate all the love and support. And y'all have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll catch y'all next week on House Call.